You know that exact visceral feeling of staring blankly at your screen? That immediate sinking sensation right in the middle of your chest? The heavy, almost deafening silence in the room after blowing yet another funded account? Look, we are bypassing the usual interest today to drop you straight into a deeply personal, totally clinical postmortem of a trading trauma that you likely know way too well.
Because every single time that liquidation alert pops up, the exact same haunting question echoes in your head, right? What is actually wrong with me? I mean, why is it that you can pass prop firm evaluations with absolute surgical precision, but then the second you touch real capital, you immediately blow it? It feels completely inexplicable, but I promise you, it's not. And you aren't just observing this right now, you are reliving it. So just let that feeling land for a second.
All right, let's dive into this. Today's explainer documents a real session with real, painful dollar outcomes. We are looking at a day where a perfectly valid technical edge, an edge that produced a super clean $600 gain, completely degraded into a disastrous downward spiral, a spiral that ended in a massive $1,700 loss. We're going to break down this session autopsy into 6 quick parts. First, the pre-session map. Second, the valid first trade. Third, the trigger. Fourth, the psychological breakdown. Fifth, the clinical diagnosis. And finally, the 2-session rules. Okay, part 1, the pre-session map. So before the chaos even started, the technical preparation was totally flawless. We defined clear liquidity targets and session windows before the price even twitched. We marked the true daily open at midnight EST to lock in our algorithmic directional bias. We mapped out the Asia and London dealing ranges so we knew exactly where all that liquidity was resting. We located the higher timeframe fair value gaps on the 15-minute and 4-hour charts as our primary delivery targets, and then we confirmed our failure swings to catch the reversals. This strategy was our map, and honestly, the map was perfect.
Moving into part 2, the valid first trade.
With the map drawn up, we moved right into the execution phase.
And the technical strategy worked perfectly. We got a beautifully clean 3-candle delivery shift, perfect structural alignment, and a completely valid execution. The result? A real, tangible $600 gain. Now here is the absolute crucial point. The thesis was fully complete. The primary liquidity target was hit. This is precisely where the session should have ended, full stop. But the choice was made to continue.
Which brings us to part 3, the exact trigger moment. The true failure of this session didn't happen during the trade. It happened only after the edge was completely played out. The thesis completes, right? But then an unnecessary, unconfirmed setup is taken simply out of boredom, and it results in a really simple stop-out. But that small loss, it acted as the precise trigger. Literally, instantly, it shifted the trader out of a state of analytical neutrality and straight into a severe emotional response. That was the exact minute the neurochemical shift hit and the disastrous downward spiral officially began. Let's dig into part 4, the psychological breakdown. To actually understand the disastrous sequence of trades that followed that trigger, we have to look way past vague concepts. We literally must stop lazily blaming this on bad discipline. Here is the massive pattern interruption you need to hear. You didn't suddenly forget how to trade the day you got funded. Instead, those prop firm evaluation rules gave you something you didn't even realize you were borrowing. They gave you an external prosthetic. That rigid structure was doing all the heavy lifting for your emotional regulation. When you got funded, those artificial boundaries just vanished, and it exposed a massive internal void. We diagnosed this using our discipline over dopamine framework, or DOD. Look, the brain registers any fast market movement as potential, and that potential triggers a dopamine hit, and that dopamine demands action, even when your technical edge is literally completely gone. Discipline over dopamine is the active daily practice of recognizing exactly when your brain is just seeking cheap stimulation, and then deliberately choosing rigid structure over giving in to that quick chemical reward. In this specific session, a really precise DOD mechanism essentially hijacked the controls. We call it the recovery certainty pattern. After that first trigger stop out, the brain immediately demanded a dopamine hit of recovery to relieve the sudden pain of that loss. Every single entry after that wasn't based on the map. It was a neurochemical revenge cycle completely disguised as market analysis. Your confirmation standards degraded to absolutely zero. And this exact pattern is what drove a beautiful $600 gain straight into a devastating $1,700 hole. Now for part 5, the clinical diagnosis. Surviving real capital under real pressure requires a total fundamental shift in your operational identity. A retail trader stares at the chart, constantly seeking validation, repeatedly asking themselves, how many trades can I find today? A professional operator, on the other hand, protects their emotional baseline above literally everything else. They ask, does this environment actually deserve my participation? It requires a 7 out of 10 emotional neutrality score. Just even look at the screen. If you drop below a 7, your participation is 0, period.
When you break down the metrics side by side, the contrast is honestly staggering. The retail trader is out there hunting action, firing off 10 trades a session, and just burning through emotional capital with a 40% win rate. The professional? They take 2. It requires extreme selectivity. By stripping away that emotional fatigue and variance, doing less actually builds a sustainable funded account significantly faster. You have to remember, the market is always going to offer trades. Your edge, however, does not.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, the 2-session rules. We have to interrupt this neurochemical revenge cycle. Because those evaluation rules vanished, you literally must build rigid internal architecture to replace them. This single autopsy generated 2 absolutely non-negotiable operational rules. Rule 1, a 20-minute mandatory cooling period immediately after any stop-out. No charts, no analysis, nothing. You must step away and let that dopamine spike completely subside. Rule 2, a $500 personal daily loss limit. The absolute second you hit it, your capital is preserved and the session strictly terminates. These aren't just cute guidelines, guys. These are survival mechanics to ensure your process always comes before your profit. So, I want you to project yourself forward into tomorrow's session. You're sitting at your desk in a state of deep, focused calm. The market spikes rapidly. You feel the impulse, sure, but you now possess the internal behavioral infrastructure to simply observe the noise without acting on it. You can finally separate a neurochemical feeling from a mechanical execution. You start to truly understand that patience creates precision. Doing absolutely nothing is actually a high-skill, incredibly active discipline. By doing nothing, you are actively protecting your edge from your own destructive participation instinct. You are defining exactly when your day is done before it even starts. Look, this specific session cost $1,700. It was an incredibly painful, incredibly expensive tuition. But the internal architecture it built, that 20-minute cooling period, those hard personal limits, the entire discipline over dopamine framework, that is worth exponentially more over the lifetime of a funded account. Because ultimately, your consistency is defined purely by your behavioral repeatability under uncertainty. Reclaim your life. Let trading simply be the vehicle. We trade to live. We do not live to trade. So the real question is, when the market spikes tomorrow, are you going to let it control your dopamine, or will you build the architecture to control yourself? Session Trading Lab.